Hello everyone, and today I'm going to briefly introduce how to assemble your personal computer 101. And I'm going to teach you how to install some computer components on your motherboard. And before the lecture, I would like to first briefly introduce the computer architecture that followed by most of the modern computers, which is Newman architecture. And what is this architecture? So basically, von Neumann architecture is nothing but required a CPU and a bunch of memories cards and also input as well as your output. And that's it. Pretty simple, right? So for your input, you are going to have your keyboard here and your mouse so that you can input your data. So your CPU is going to calculate something for you, do the calculation for you. And your CPU is going to store some intermediate result in your memory and for later reuse. And for your output, you are going to need a monitor here so that you can see your result from your screen. Okay, so based on this architecture, we can understand that there are a couple of things that are required. For example, you need a CPU, right? And you also need some memory card. And you also need disks and a power supply, etc. So these are required. And for those who play video games a lot, might require GPU or an advanced cooler system like water-based cooler, etc. But these are optional. Okay, so let's move on how to install your computer components on your motherboard. And first, let's take a look at your CPU. If you flip your CPU, you can see the structure in the back. So this is lag. For example, for the last generation, the CPU lag is 1151. That means you really need to find a motherboard which support this lag number. Okay, so on your motherboard, you can see a CPU socket on your motherboard. And this is an array of pins. Different motherboards um, have different arrays of pins. So you really need to find a specific motherboard support a specific leg number for your CPU. For example, you need to find an array of pins that support, for example, if you have a leg 1151, you need to find a motherboard with an array of pins that support 1151 CPU. Okay, and as you can see here, there are notches, and when the time you place your CPU on the CPU socket, remember a notch to a notch so that you can place your CPU in the correct position. And once you place your CPU in the correct position, you can apply a little bit harder to this stick, to push this stick to fix your CPU on the CPU socket. And that's it. You finish the most important installation. You just finish it. Okay. And here you can see memory slot right aside your CPU. So this is where you need to plug in your memory card. It's very simple, just plug in and fix it. Okay, so let's move on to the rest of the computer components you are going to need. Okay, so for example, here again, you can see um, this is your CPU, right? And this means your CPU model, and 10 means the generation, and 700 means some digital number. So these two number, larger, better. And you can also see a lag, just like we mentioned before. So if you are going to have a 1200, so what you really need to do is you really need to find a motherboard that support this lag. Okay, so you can also see there is a ATX in the information. So this means the size. So there are three different size. For example, ATX, MATX, and ITX. So ATX means I would say large, and MATX is medium, and ITX means small. So if you select ATX motherboard, you need to look up a case which also support this size. Otherwise, they are not going to compatible with each other. So this is a very important thing you really need to keep in mind. Okay. And also you can see this is a model for your motherboard. So for example, for Intel-based CPU, for example, the motherboard have Z, H, and B, and this direction means high end, and this direction means low end. So for Model Z, it allows you to overclocking. So if you are player that require overclocking, you might need to pick up this model. Okay. And after you pick up all your components, hopefully this website do the calculation for you, calculate the wattage estimation for you. And last but not least, you need to pick up a power supply. So for example, my wattage estimation is 335, right? So you really need to pick up a power supply with a number larger than estimation. Okay, so that's it. You finish the selection of your computer component. And the rest of the thing you really need to do is you really need to install them one by one onto your motherboard. Okay, so thanks for your attention.